A real one.
Shams
is reporting the Clippers, Jazz, and Heat have agreed to a trade that sends Norman Powell to Miami.
Whoa.
John Collins to the LA Clippers, and Kevin Love, Kyle Anderson, 2027 Clippers second-round pick to the Utah Jazz.
Wow. Great timing, Shams.
A real trade. Only 3 teams. Yeah. Not going down in history. Norm Powell to the Heat, John Collins to the Clippers, Kevin Love, Kyle Anderson to the Jazz.
Yeah, the Heat aren't messing around. They're saying we want a player in getting Norman Powell.
Well, they didn't really have to trade much, right? They gave up Kevin Love, who gets into their rotation when guys are injured, and then Kyle Anderson, who they got in a trade last year. And people thought he would probably fit better in Miami, but I think this is definitely an upgrade to get another ball handler in Norman Powell, because the second ball handler for Miami was probably going to be their rookie, Kasparis Yakachonis. Hero is going to be the number 1 guy there handling the ball. So they need a little bit more scoring, a little bit more shooting. Makes sense for Miami because the cost is pretty low. Love and Anderson. I assume the Clippers are throwing in their own second-round pick.
Yes.
And I think that's a good get for LA as well, to get John Collins for essentially a second-round pick. That's going to help their backup big situation. They brought in... They brought in Brook Lopez.
Yep.
They've got John Collins as well. Collins can play small ball 5 if they need him to. He's better suited as a 4, I think, but he can shoot the 3. Brook Lopez can shoot the 3. Clippers are beefing up their bench a little bit. They've had a pretty nice rotation. Once again, it'll come down to the health of Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, but sure, I think this is a fine move.
And John Collins, correct me if I'm wrong, he had just exercised his player option with Utah here in free agency, and then, of course, now is on the move going to LA. But yeah, Norman Powell, the biggest name, best player in this 3-team deal here from Shams.
Yeah, the Miami Heat didn't have to give up much, but you can see that in the Eastern Conference, teams are going for it. Miami Heat literally getting a guy who was on the borderline of being an all-star last year for the first time in his career. Norman Powell, a very, very good player, and they just need a secondary ball handler, and he can be that. There's no doubt about that. From the Clippers side, it shows they are not going to go get a guard that people rumored about, that maybe if Bradley Beal is bought out, as we'll talk about, maybe they were the team that were going to go get it. They are willing to spend, because you just said he opted into his player option. This guy's getting paid. That's a good chunk of change for them to pay. They are trying to lengthen this window of Kawhi Leonard and James Harden as much as possible. Because Collins was good for the Utah Jazz as a guy who will hang out in the corner and hit a 3. Obviously, is super duper athletic. He can add something to a team. I guess Norm Powell gone. Secondary ball handler is gone as well. He provided a monstrous fourth quarter against the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs when Harden and Kawhi weren't killing it. He was important. So the ball handler. Are they short one in Los Angeles?
They're getting one short one in Los Angeles is what I would say this indicates. Chris Paul, come on down. He's already been rumored to be a Clippers target, and if they're trading basically their third ball handler in Norm Powell, a guy who was a 20-point-per-game scorer due to injuries and spots in the rotation opening up at various times, they got to replace him in some way. Obviously, John Collins is not his replacement, so I think this is just setting the table for Chris Paul to make his way back to the Clippers.
I think that makes sense because, looking at Norman Powell's contract, he's only under contract for one more year. He's 25.
Him and Collins both expiring.
Yes. So and then they had the decision: are we going to pay Norman Powell or are we not? So they're off of that. And you think they'd get some ball handling help in here. Probably Chris Paul. I guess potentially Beal. We'll get into that and whether he's bought out and stretched and Wade and all that stuff. Yeah. But all right, good stuff.
It's got to be Chris Paul because at first the talk was he's going to go back to LA. Why would he do that? But this makes sense. There was even rumors. I was buying into the Drew Holiday before he was dealt that he would be perfect there, put Chris Dunn to the bench, ideally in a perfect scenario, and Chris Paul would make a lot of sense. He told Jamel Hill, this is going to be my last year. So he's got one more year.
Yeah.
Go back to LA because, as I said, they're trying to go for it as much as possible by going to get a guy who's getting paid in John Collins to join Zubats up front, Brook Lopez up front, with Kawhi and James Harden. That's another team that literally is trying to maximize what they got.
All right. Fun stuff.